science enthusiasts. My name is Jason Zakowski. I'm a high school chemistry teacher and science communicator, but I'm also the dog dad of Bunsen and Beaker, the science dogs on social media. If you love science and you love pets, you've come to the right place. So put on your safety glasses, do up your lab coat, hold on to your tail. It's time for the Science Pawdcast. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Science Pawdcast. We hope you're happy and healthy out there. I mentioned last week that it snowed and then it got real warm. It was probably confusing for people when I talk about weather, but that's one of the things that really impacts what we do with the dogs every day is weather. And we may get spring, quote unquote spring. It could snow at any time. And the creek has started running. So that's been hilarious to watch Beaker wade through this freezing water. She just loves the water so much. And Bunsen give it the widest berth you could possibly imagine because it is just a disgrace to him if he gets his paws wet. He's such a diva. We had a fun live chat about Beaker passing level 2 on our Twitter space. And I just wanted to mention that she did pass level 2. We're so proud of her, and it's a really hard test. All right, what's on the Science Pawdcast this week? In science news, we're going to look at vampire bats, okay? And in a much more serious kind of tone, in pet science, we're going to look at cancer in dogs and how it relates to cancer in humans. Our guest in Ask an Expert is Alex Gabard, who is a mechanical engineer, and is going to talk to us about a whole bunch of things related to chemistry, but also, some of the struggles of having long COVID. Hey, dogs. Do you know what the definition of an engineer is? Someone who solves a problem you didn't know you had in a way you don't understand. That could be true for many things in science. Okay, on with the show, because there's no time like science time. All right, this week in science news, we have a fun story/study/science to talk about with vampire bats. One of my all-time favorite movies is the original What We Do in the Shadows with Taika Waititi. I think that's how you say his name. I might have said it wrong. Anyway, he's the director of the Ragnarok movie, Thor Ragnarok. And it's about vampires set in, I believe, New Zealand, and how they're like living together, and it's like The Office. So they get interviewed about their life as vampires. I know there is a American spinoff, What We Do in the Shadows, and it's quite good. Kris and I are watching it. Just be careful. Like there's lots of violence and swearing and inappropriateness. And I guess that's what makes it so funny. So when I saw this study about vampire bats, I was like, oh, I have vampires on the brain. I have to check out this study. We've had bat expert Dr. Kristen Lear on the podcast, and she also spoke in our spaces on Twitter about bats. And this scientist is just a freaking genius about bats. And I could listen to her talk about them forever. Most bats, not like vampire bats, but most bats are they're fruit bats, or they eat insects and other small critters, flying critters. But vampire bats subsist only on blood. They have a blood-only diet. Now, some bat scientists took a look at maybe why or how that came about in an animal. If you think about it, like how many animals besides a mosquito subsists only on blood? There's probably more than there's probably more than a mosquito and a vampire bat, but not very many, right? There's not very many animals that their only diet is blood. This report is from Science Advances in March. There are, 13 genes that bats have appeared to have lost over time. So the study keys in on these 13 different genes. And the whole idea is that over evolutionary timeframes, some genes can be good, like they can help you out, or not so great. So there are genes that are lost or gained over long periods of time that, of course, help you survive and pass on your genetic information. What the team did is they took a look at the genes found within a vampire bat, and they compared it to 26 other bat species, including some bats that were in the same family as vampire bats, but didn't only subsist on blood. And then they keyed in on the differences in the genetic playbook, instruction book, between the 26 different types of bats. Now, here's some interesting things that they reported. The 13 different genes that have been lost. The vampire bats don't have these genes. One of the genes codes for taste receptors for salt and sweet. And it appears that vampire bats really don't have that much taste. So I don't know. I'm trying to think, like, I've obviously tasted blood before by licking my own wound or something like that. I don't know what it really tastes like. I haven't drank copious amounts of it to, give you a flavor profile, but it's probably good if you don't really have a sense of taste to snack on blood. And the more I read into the study, the more fascinating some of the lost genes are. For example, one of the genes lost in vampire bats helps regulate insulin. And if you think about regulating insulin and blood sugar levels, there's not a lot of sugar in blood. So vampire bats don't necessarily need that gene as well. Another gene that most mammals have is acid production in their gastrointestinal tract. That helps break down solid food. Vampire bats don't have that gene, which kind of makes sense because you are not eating solid food. You're slurping it down from some of their animals. It's a fluid diet. If your diet is only blood, vampire bats drink so much blood, and the iron that's found in the blood would be potentially dangerous for their body weight. Like if you gave that iron content to another bat of a similar size. And one of the genes that they lost is for the uptake of iron in the gastrointestinal tract. The vampire bats, I guess their gastrointestinal cells, they slough off at a faster rate and get pooped out or peed out. So bats can excrete this iron, whereas in other bats, it would have been uptook by these gastrointestinal cells. I find that fascinating, that to get around the problem, the gastrointestinal cells just fall off faster. They just slough off. If you study vampire bats, and not to say that I have, but I did a little bit of more background researches. And one study actually that I didn't talk about, it was really, every week I have to make a decision. Do I talk about this one or another one? Vampire bats make really strong bonds with each other. And if one vampire bat is starving, they'll actually regurgitate blood and give that blood to a starving vampire. And there's, in the genetic traits, there are some genes that the vampire bats have or don't have, different than other bats, that may account for that bond that they make with their family members or other bats. So when comparing vampire bats to a regular bat, there is lost genetic information that gave the vampire bat an advantage in whatever their food source of blood. If they had those genes, obviously they'd be a different creature. Without them, they are the vampire bat, the only bat species to live off an only blood diet. I want to suck your blood, blah, blah, blah. All right, that's science news for this week. This week in pet science, we're going to talk about cancer in dogs and how it relates to cancer in humans. We're acutely aware of, how short dogs' lives are. We, of course, lost our golden retriever, Kellen. She was the dog we had before Bunsen to cancer. And having such a large account on Twitter, it's we get lots of people tagging us that their animal's sick or, their animal has passed away. And it just drives home that dogs do get cancer. Dogs do die young compared to what humans get to experience, which is really unfair, by the way, when a snake gets to outlive a dog. Okay, but that's a podcast for another day. So I saw the study about cancer in dogs and cancer in humans, and it's looking at a relatively non-lethal cancer in dogs and comparing it to a very lethal cancer in humans. One of the things as a teacher, too, I always get from kids is like, why are we doing this? Why are we sending things to space? Well, a space scientist could answer that better than me. But the answer is we send things to space so we learn more about Earth. It seems backwards, but because of that, we now know how things operate on Earth, from the weather to getting satellites up in space. If you got a cell phone, you're holding why space exploration is so important. Getting satellites up there allows for global communications. So the other thing is like, why are we studying dogs? Aside, why are we looking at dog cancer? In this case, is that when we know more about what happens in dogs, we can potentially apply that to humans. And the same thing with studying cats. There's a lot of similarities between cats and dogs and humans, and unlocking those mysteries could benefit us as humans. So again, I don't know anything about this type of cancer. I'm going off what the study said and my own research. There's this type of cancer called CAA, and I'm going to butcher saying it, Canine Acanthomatous Ameloblastoma. Okay, so it's a type of cancer. It's a type of cancer that's fairly common and non-lethal, so it can be cut out and treated. And it has actually a very strong resemblance to tumors in humans, which is super dangerous, called AM or ameloblastoma. So I guess there's a canine acanthomatous ameloblastoma. Triple word score in Scrabble. And this human cancer. From Science Reports, look at that, it's from Science Reports again. Go Science Reports, this is from Science Reports. We have Associate Professor and College of Veterinary Medicine, Dentist and Oral Surgeon, Dr. Santiago Peralta, Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Now, while there has been people mentioning, boy, these look similar, and they are, nobody studied the nitty-gritty of it, like the molecular similarities. And that's what this study in Science Reports is all about. This study quickly gets really specific, and Peralta in the study looked at the mutation, the shared mutations between the two different cancers. Remember, because cancer is a mutation, and they have mutated along a similar pathway. And I'm not going to get into the pathway. It's got this acronym, but it's like a, normal cell does XYZ and then it gets all screwed up and becomes a cancer cell. Well, the canine cancer and the us cancer in the mouth mutates along that same pathway. Now, it wasn't just along the pathway they looked at. They sequenced the RNA. They took tissue from humans and they looked at the genome of the humans and then the genome changes in the cancer. All of these different tissues and all of these different findings allowed them to see that they identified that the mutations in the dog cancer is the same as the mutations in the human cancer. Now, this is important because all of the molecular mistakes in the genes found within dogs, found within these cells, makes them a good model now to study to help treat the cancer in humans. The cancer in humans that we're talking about, that really deadly AM cancer, is kind of rare. The canine cancer is kind of common. I didn't know that, but it is apparently. So when you have a more common type of cancer in dogs that doesn't kill them, you have a greater opportunity to study it and apply treatment to it to then get data from, to thus then apply to humans. Also, dogs and humans live in relatively the same environment, so that's cool. That gives you the same kind of model for environmental concerns. Now, this study hasn't outlined treatments for humans. This study has just pretty much conclusively linked that they're very, very similar cancers. They mutate along the similar pathway, and they have similar mistakes at the molecular level. It's a feel-good story for us. It's a serious topic, cancer, but it potentially has some great benefits for both the dog and us as humans. That's Pet Science for this week. Hey everybody, before we get to the interview section, I thought I would just give you some ideas about how you could support the Science Pawdcast. Number one, you could support us on Patreon. Check out patreon.com/BunsonBurner. There's multiple tiers of support, and the lowest tier of support is not much more than a cup of coffee a month. The second way is you could check out our merch shop. We've worked really hard to partner with clothing companies that do a great job of providing vibrant colors and soft feels. We also have the Beaker stuffy for sale. It's so cute. The third way you could support us is giving us great reviews on our podcast playing apps. Any kind of review helps. And if you can't find a review, share our podcast with people. Thanks, everybody. It's time for Ask an Expert on the Science Pawdcast, and I have Alex Gabard, who is a mechanical engineer. How are you doing today, Alex?
Well, could be better, but we'll get to that in a moment.
We'll get to that, yeah.
I'm fine.
Okay, well, I'm excited to talk to you. Where are you in the world? Where are you calling into the podcast from?
I am located in Switzerland near Zurich. So
okay.
We are actually, the two of us are actually like 8 hours apart. And we found a common time to make this work.
I know. Thank you so much for being accommodating. So Switzerland, that's on my bucket list to head out to Switzerland. It's kind of like Alberta with the Rocky Mountains because you guys have the Alps
Yeah,
close, hey?
yeah. It's the nice thing about this place. It's tiny, so you can cover the whole country within like a few hours of driving.
That is a big difference between Switzerland and Alberta / Canada. Yeah, because you
Yeah,
got to drive
absolutely.
2 hours to get anywhere in
Yeah.
Alberta.
So, I mean, for instance, we can go skiing through the day and get back home and sleep in our own bed. So this is something that most other places you're not able to do.
No, it's a whole day trip, or you got to stay overnight.
Yeah,
Do you ski, Alex?
I used to. I haven't
Used
been
to? Okay.
skiing for years, but these days I just like to go, for a hike, be
Oh
it in the
yeah.
snow or in the summer. I don't know, skiing. There's too many people on the slopes these days.
It's a lot of people, and then if you crash, you kind of like can wreck yourself too.
Yeah. That's another thing. Although the we've had my wife had I want to say a collision. She had a guy bump into her at high speed, and that wasn't nice. So
No.
this is why I'm saying there's too many people.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a young teacher that works at our school, she got crashed into, and
Yeah,
she has to go for knee surgery because of it.
yeah.
If you've for
It's
the people listening, if you've never seen downhill skiing, like you go pretty fast sometimes. So
yeah, and I mean, you can manage your own speed and your track or whatever, but you have no control over other people.
it's true. It is fun though. Like there is that. That's why so many
Yeah,
people do it.
yeah.
So let's talk about you, Alex. You're a mechanical engineer. What's your training? Like, what did you do to get to where you are? Like, what's your
Um,
educational background?
my educational background is I have what we call a maturity certificate. That's 13 years of school. I specialized in natural sciences, so physics, mathematics, chemistry, and interestingly enough, I wanted to become a musician at this point, and I tried to apply to a few um, colleges for musicians in Germany, but it didn't work out, and I realized I wasn't cut out to be in this environment where you have a lot of competition and it's pretty cutthroat. So I yeah, it's when you talk to these people, it's amazing the things they tell you. So I went back into my corner and thought about it and said, well, what else can I do? And I've also always had a soft spot for cars, old cars, and I've also had a moped when I was 14, which of course was disassembled and reassembled in a better way to make it faster. Don't tell my dad.
Nice.
And so I thought, well, why not mechanical engineering? I have the mathematical background, and I like to think in 3 dimensions. So that's where I went for. So I now have a bachelor in mechanical engineering, and everything else is just professional experience.
Cool. Now, what the meat and potatoes, or the main idea of why we're talking to you, is you have some knowledge / work with particle accelerators.
Yes,
So holy cow, that is so cool.
it is.
Could you yeah, it is so cool. Could you explain to our audience what a particle accelerator is?
All right. So in this case, when we talk about particles, we mean protons or electrons.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Electrons are created by shooting a laser at a special surface, a special material, and it just ejects electrons from this surface, which you can then accelerate in your particle accelerator. And to create protons, you create a plasma and inject hydrogen. Remember chemistry at school? Hydrogen is one proton that is surrounded by one electron.
Mm-hmm.
So you create a plasma, which means you break up the bond between the electron and the proton, and then you have two plates, one with a positive charge and one with a negative charge, and the electron and the proton respectively will be attracted to one of those, since the proton has a positive charge and the electron has a negative charge. So we use these particles for various experiments. We shoot the protons, for instance, at targets to create secondary particles, which can then be used in material science, medical applications. We use the electrons to generate what we call synchrotron light, which is light in the X-ray or infrared spectrum with a very specific wavelength, which is tunable, and you can use these for instance, protein crystallography, which I can explain if you're interested. We also have one proton accelerator that is used for cancer therapy.
Oh, cool!
This is usually the most relatable thing I can mention, because somehow everybody has an idea about cancer and cancer treatment, whereas
exactly.
Secondary particles like pions and muons, many people are have a hard time imagining what it is. But we'll get to that. I'm pretty sure we'll talk about it.
So just a couple follow-up to dial things down for our audience. When you're talking about protons and electrons, these are like absolutely teeny tiny things you can never see with your eyes.
Yes,
right.
You cannot. If anyone is aware of the LHC at CERN in Geneva, they shoot protons at each other for collisions. So you have what we call a bunch. It's 10 to the 10 or 10 to the 13 protons in one bunch that go at very high speed, near this, maybe 2/3 of the speed of light, in the accelerator, and then they collide. And still, even though they have this absolutely humongous amount of protons, it's to get a collision. It's like shooting one needle from New York and one needle from London, and have them collide in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. That's how precise you have to be to get a collision.
And then the needles hit and explode basically into a whole bunch of cool other stuff.
Exactly. So you have these huge detectors, which have about 30 meters in diameter and maybe 50 meters in length, where there's a multitude of sensors to pick up all these different elements and see what happens during this collision, actually.
It's absolutely mind-boggling how this happens. And if I could ask a couple follow-up questions to what you just said. The first one is, you said it could be used in material science. Could you explain an example of that for everybody?
For instance, you can analyze the magnetic properties of semiconductors, with, of course, the emphasis on new materials for semiconductors. So you come up with a new material and you want to know if it works, and you can use muons to make to analyze the magnetic properties of this material. Or, for instance, superconductivity is also an interesting topic, where you try to look into the properties of a material to determine how well it could be used as a superconductor.
And this is a big deal because everything around us relies on the conductivity of materials.
Exactly.
Like a lot of our technology.
Imagine a world without semiconductors.
Good luck. Well, we wouldn't be talking to each other.
For starters, we wouldn't be talking, yes.
Okay, and the second follow-up question, and you hinted at it, was cancer treatment. Could you talk about that?
Yes. So there's two ways, classic ways right now for medicine to treat cancer. One is chemo. So that's basically you fill your body with poison, and you use the fact that cancer cells regenerate slower than healthy cells. So you poison your whole body and wait for the healthy cells to regenerate and kill off the cancer with this process. Radiation therapy is a little bit of a problem because the energy deposited in the tissue reduces linearly with penetration depth. So
okay.
the deeper you want to go into the tissue, because your tumor, I mean, it's always a three-dimensional problem. The tumor is inside the body, and you want to shoot your radiation at it.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to add a certain penetration depth to try to kill the tumor. And there are two effects that, as a result, one is the highest dose of radiation will be on the surface of your skin, because that's where the highest energy is, and it decreases linearly with depth. And since you want to deposit energy in the back end of the tumor, you will also deposit energy behind the tumor in the surrounding tissue. So, and why is this a problem? If you irradiate healthy tissue, well, you might create cancer or deterioration. So you're actually creating something that you're trying to fight. So, I mean, this is, of course, we're speaking long-term damage here, but still, you want to reduce the damage to the surrounding tissue as much as possible.
Right. There are unintended consequences for this type of treatment.
For protons, there is a thing called the Bragg peak. This is a very peculiar property of the proton beam. It's when you shoot it at the human body, or, for instance, water. We use water for experiments to test the beam before we use it on patients. There is very little energy deposition in the beginning, and when the proton basically stops where the penetration depth of its energy is reached, it deposits most of its energy and almost nothing behind. So
wow.
By it's called the Bragg peak. You can look it up. It's quite.
I can see why it's called the Bragg peak, because you should be bragging about how amazing this is.
I'm trying. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And so by modulating the depth of the beam and scanning it left and right, you can fill the volume, the 3D volume of the tumor with a lot of energy. And at the same time, you reduce the radiation dose on the skin to a minimum and to almost zero behind the tumor. So it's much less damaging to the healthy areas around the tumor, which is why we use it a lot for children. Because obviously, if you're 80 years old and you get a radiation treatment that might cause cancer, it might cause cancer at 10 or 15 years, and that's less of an issue if you're already 80 years old. But if you're a child and you have cancer, and you are irradiated, and on your skin there could be cancer in 10 or 15 years. So you really create a new problem for the patient, which you don't want to do. So you use the proton therapy to avoid damage to the healthy tissue around. That's one. And the second one is for brain tumors, because you can shoot from an angle where you basically penetrate the tumor directly, and there's no energy deposition behind it inside the brain, which is very, very sensitive to radiation damage.
Sounds like you don't want to miss anything in the brain, for sure.
Yeah.
It almost like this is like, it sounds like you're using a rocket launcher versus a sniper rifle. Like it's, if you want to talk weapons, like one is kind of like you hope for the best and you take out the tumor and a little bit of collateral damage. Yeah. And the other is like it's pretty pinpoint accurate, which is amazing.
Yeah. Or I would say bread knife versus a scalpel.
Oh, okay. I like that. That's maybe a little less militaristic. Oh, that's so cool. Can I ask another question about particle accelerators?
Sure, that's what I'm here for.
Yeah, okay. So, like, I know this maybe isn't 100% what you do, but For people that have been listening to the podcast a while back, we talked about the new elements that are created, the human created elements, and these are ones that don't exist in nature. They are made because of particle accelerator collisions. Am I on the right track?
Yes.
Now, could you explain that briefly?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
So I mentioned briefly hydrogen, which is just one proton and one electron.
Mm-hmm.
So the further down you go, the table of the elements, the more protons and neutrons are in the nucleus of the atom, and the more electrons are on the outside shells. Now, the number of electrons and the shells is, in my eyes, in this discussion, a little secondary. But the point is, the bigger elements have more protons and neutrons. So what you take two elements that already have a lot and shoot them at each other and hope that it creates an even bigger mass of protons and neutrons to create a new element that has a bigger nucleus. This is my very simple, straightforward way of trying to explain it. For instance, that was a few years ago. I read an article about, I think it was for element 115, which I'm cheating. I have a periodic table open here. 115 is now called moscovium.
Moscovian, yeah.
Yeah. So they were shooting a calcium beam at an americium target. So calcium is element number 20.
Number 20.
And americium is number 95.
There you go. 20 plus 95 gives you 115.
There you go. So that's how it works.
That is amazing. It's kind of like, it's a little bit like mad science, isn't it? They just hope it sticks for a second.
Yeah, well, less than a second, actually.
Oh yeah, milliseconds.
It's milliseconds, actually, and you don't see the element. You can only prove that it was around by collecting the decay elements and calculating backwards towards your element. I mean, let's stick it with element 115. It has where are we? Half-life. So there are actually 4 isotopes. It's between 37 milliseconds and 650 milliseconds. So this would almost be half a second already, but still, it's there and poof, it's gone. So you collect the floor scrapings and put it back together.
It's like, did you bake a pie? Well, I don't have evidence of the pie, but look, there's crumbs in an empty plate, and
Exactly.
and that guy over there is a stomachache. So I'm pretty sure there was a pie.
Yeah. That's exactly how it is. Yeah.
Cool. Now, the last thing I wanted to just touch on briefly, and it's something that you mentioned you'd like to talk about, is relativity and how that mixes with accelerators. I'd be fascinated for you to tell us how it's connected.
Well, there's 2 ways it's connected. The first is you have to take into account that you enter relativistic speeds for the particles with the particles in the accelerator, which means specifically that they will gain mass, and you have to take this into account for your beam transfer. And also for your accelerating structures, you need to tune your accelerating structures to the beam to get a proper acceleration. The second context where relativity is important is, for instance, in our case, we shoot the proton beam at a carbon target and create muons, or pions, which decay into muons very quickly. And a muon has a lifetime of 2 microseconds. But we can still transfer it through a line of magnets and dipoles and solenoids into an experimental area and actually have experiments be performed with these muons, even though they only live for 2 microseconds. So the point here is that because these muons are at a relativistic speed, there's time dilution, and they actually live longer for us than they would be at rest. And
the faster they move, the slower time acts on them around them.
Yeah,
Is that?
yeah.
Oh, wow.
There's also the muons are a very good example for this, because there are constantly muons being created in the at the upper edge of our atmosphere, because the cosmic rays collide with elements of the atmosphere in the outmost layers, and they also, amongst other things, they create muons. Now, a muon that is created there with 2 microseconds, if it would fly towards the surface of the Earth, that's like, I think like 500 meters or something, 2 microseconds at the speed of light, give or take. Yeah. So it's not very far. However, we are capable of measuring those muons on the surface of the Earth, which means they travel at least 80 kilometers through the atmosphere down to the surface where we can measure them. So how can this be? Well, that is because the muon moves at a relativistic speed. So it lives longer for us than it would at rest, because it's moving at relativistic speed. And if you would sit on the muon, you would see that there is a contraction of the space around you. There's a length contraction. So in the muon's frame, the muon only lives 2 microseconds. This is where it gets interesting with relativity, where these different views mix depending on where you are placed as an observer.
So sitting on the muon, if you could ride a muon,
yeah,
you'd blink out of existence in 2 microseconds.
Yes.
But to us who are observing the muon, it has lived for much, much longer than that, because it's just cooking fast.
Exactly.
Yeah, that is a bit of a mind-bending thing, isn't it?
Yep, it is. It's.
I love it.
Mean, there's the train paradox. You can Google it. There's different variations of it. The one I like to tell is, you have a train and a tunnel, and the tunnel and the train have the same length. There is the train driver in the engine, and there's, at the end of the train, there's a caboose with a guy, an observer in there, and there's one observer at the entrance of the tunnel. The train moves at a relativistic speed, so the guy in the caboose will see the train engine exit the tunnel before he enters it. Remember, the tunnel at rest has the same length as the train. So the caboose observer sees that the tunnel is shorter than the train. The observer at the tunnel entrance sees that the whole train fits into the tunnel and then some, because the train is shorter than the tunnel. And everybody's right, So it's really mind blowing.
I was trying to explain that to I have a younger class. When I teach a younger class, I teach high school science. And one of my classes is a grade 9 class. So they're like 15-year-olds, right? And I was explaining how gravity warps space-time, and they were just like, I think I broke their brains for the rest of the day. But those conversations, for the kids that are curious about that kind of stuff, those are the kids that may pursue that as a career. So I like talking about that and breaking their brains, because a few of them are the ones that are going to be like, I want to know more about that, and they'll get to go all in on that. Hey, very cool, Alex. Thank you. So we have 2 standard questions on the podcast. The first one is a pet story. We ask our guests to share a pet story from their life. Do you have a pet story you could share with us?
Absolutely. For starters, I am very much a dog person.
Yay.
So I think half of the accounts I follow on Twitter are dog accounts, including, of course, Bunsen and Beaker.
Yay.
Yeah, exactly. So my pet story is my grandfather used to have an Irish setter,
Oh, they're cute.
and I always call it my dog because it kind of was, and I grew up with that dog. She came into my life when I was 7 or 8, and we had her for 18 years. So
Wow.
she was really around a long time, and during all my childhood, basically, that I can remember. So to this day, I mean, I have a picture of my dog on the desk here. I'm looking right at it. So it's always touching to remember the good times we had, and I really, really love that dog.
What was the dog's name again? I'm sorry.
Lady.
Lady. Aw.
She was a lady, so her name was Lady.
Aw. Irish setters are sweethearts, aren't they? They're super
Yeah,
cuddly, and I mean, they can be trained to be quite smart, but they're also goofballs. They're kind of like a golden retriever, actually.
yeah. But they have an incredible amount of energy. And
Yes.
you could go for a walk for 2 hours. She would run all the time, chase birds and whatnot, and run around. And you come home, and then for some reason you go, you go for the door because you want to go outside, and the dog is here and says, let's go for a walk, let's go for a walk, let's go for a walk.
Yeah, that's like Beaker. The more we take her for walks, the greater in shape she gets.
Yeah.
Whereas Bunsen, when he loves those walks, like he loves to go for an adventure, but he is good to like sleep the rest of the day.
Yeah.
So he's kind of like me. That's a very touching story, Alex. Thanks for sharing your pet story about Lady.
Sure.
The other question that's standard on the podcast is the super fact. And the super fact is something that that when you share it with people, it kind of like blows their mind a bit. And I think we've blown people's minds quite a bit already talking about particle accelerators and the relativity. But did you save a super fact for us?
Yes. It's
Yay.
another thought experiment. You imagine the Earth. Imagine Earth as a sphere with a solid surface. You lay a rope around the equator, and you pull it tight, and then you insert 1 meter of additional rope. How much will the rope lift off of the surface of the Earth?
My brain says a meter, but I don't think that's true.
No, that's too much. But usually people will say it's very little, like
very little. Okay, maybe I pictured it wrong.
No. Actually, it's the relation is 2 pi. So 1 meter of circumference means 1 divided by 2 pi in radius. So it's just about 16 centimeters, which I think is a lot. If you consider that we're talking about 40,000 kilometers of rope, you're inserting 1 meter and it lifts the whole thing 16 centimeters. That's a lot, I think.
Oh, yeah. So okay. I thought about it wrong. Yeah.
That's my super fact.
That is cool.
And if you want a meter, it's easy. If you want the rope to be lifted off a meter off the surface of the Earth, you need just above 6 meters of rope to be inserted into the circumference, which is not a lot.
Wow.
And the next cool thing is it's the same if you wrap a rope around your belly and then insert 1 meter or 6 meters. The distance will be the same.
Okay, because it's a circle.
Yes, and it's the relative relation between radius and diameter that plays a role, and not the exact amount, the absolute value of the radius or the circumference. It's a relative calculation, which is always 2 pi.
2 pi. There you go. That's ironic because we were talking about pi already when you were using relativity. I love that. Okay, I'm gonna when I re-listen to this, I'll catch where I goofed because I get it now. I think maybe I was just picturing something else. And I might edit my stupid answer out if that's okay, Alex.
Oh, you're the boss.
Okay. That's a super fact. That is a mind-blowing fact for everybody trying to do 2 pi calculations in their head while they're driving. So
Yes.
make sure you pull over, folks, if you're going to be doing math in your head that's taxing your ability to concentrate.
Yeah, I will not be made liable for any accident.
Yeah. Good job, Alex. The last question on the podcast lets us get to know our guests a little bit more than what they do for a career. And Alex, you wanted to talk about something that you mentioned, actually, you hinted at the very, very start of the podcast, and that is you are not feeling super great.
No.
And it's because you have long COVID. Do you want to talk about that with us?
Yes, I would like to raise attention to this problem.
Mm-hmm.
We talk a lot about COVID, the infection itself. We talk about people ending up in the ICU, having to be intubated, or God forbid, dying from COVID. Mm-hmm. But there's one issue that many people don't know about, and some people also forget about. It's called long COVID, and this is something rather debilitating that takes over your life in a very strong way, and it just destroys your life almost completely. It turns your life upside down. What I'm trying to say is I have long COVID, which means my brain doesn't function properly most of the time. I have a hard time concentrating. We are now about 35 minutes into this interview, and this is already a lot for me. I don't know how much longer we will be, but I'm very, very certain that after the interview, I will be completely finished and tired, and I'll probably go right to sleep at 6 p.m. here. So that's to give you an idea.
Yeah, well, Alex, thank you for talking to us. For one, despite having long COVID, so thank you. I mean, that means a lot to me that you took the time to talk, even though you're suffering from long COVID. So I just want to let you know that.
Thank you. So it's really your brain doesn't function properly. You're tired all the time. The simplest tasks are complicated. You have no energy whatsoever to go for a grocery run or take a walk with your dog. It's just no. You can't. It's too much, and this is why I'm saying it. It really turns your life upside down. I haven't been working 100% since January, and my situation has gotten worse again. And right now, I'm on 100% sick leave because I can't work. My brain just won't let me work. It's just I can focus, I can concentrate. It's really debilitating, and it's also very frustrating because you can do better, but you can't.
Alex, so you got COVID. Did you recover quickly from it?
Yes, I had a very mild COVID. What do you say? Event or whatever. I'm looking for a word here. Anyway, it was very mild for me, but it never really went away. And it just stayed the way I was sick. I had a cough that went away. I had a little fever that went away. But the tiredness and the lack of concentration just stayed. It never went away.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
Thank you.
We actually spoke to somebody who will be in the same season, like season 4. Her name's Amanda Finley. You might want to connect with her on Twitter. She has long COVID. She's a archaeologist, and she started a group to gather people's stories. So just as an aside,
as a matter of fact, I had my booster today. No, the vaccination did not have any impact on my health, one way or another.
I think it's so important that we talk about this, Alex, because the naysayers, I don't know if it happened in your country, but in Canada, there's a small percentage of people that don't think COVID's real. They think that, either old people die from it and everybody else is okay. And we don't they're not getting the message that it's not you're okay or you die. There's like a gray area in the middle where there's a lot of people that have been really affected from COVID.
Exactly.
And you're one of those stories. So
it's 10% of the infected people still have at least one symptom after 6 months.
Good grief. I'm so sorry to hear that. I hope your story, like our podcast is it's not tiny, but we're not huge, but I hope your story reaches people. And as we come out of this, I hope there's more research that goes into looking as to why people have long COVID and potentially lessening the symptoms, right?
That's one of the problems, quote unquote. It's completely new. It's long COVID has been a thing since last year. And before that, it was completely unknown to anybody in the medical profession. So they're only starting to realize, A, it's a problem, and B, we should maybe do something about it, but we don't know what.
Well, 10% of
has just started.
Go ahead, sorry.
Research has just started to try and find out what's causing it and what could be helpful. I've had my share of physical therapy and things like that, but those are all just trying to relieve the symptoms, but not helping with the origin of the problem.
Another thing that our listeners might be interested in is my brother-in-law, his best friend is a physiotherapist, and they have had to open up an entire clinic in Alberta, Canada, to help people with long COVID. Like that is the only people they treat. Like that's how much of a deal this is, and it's very hidden. And it's not, maybe people don't talk about it, or you don't know somebody that is suffering, but it's there. Yep. And I think as the curtain gets pulled back on all of this, there's going to be so many more stories. And thank you for sharing yours today, Alex.
Sure. Maybe if I made it aware for one or two people out there, my deal is done.
Well, you've had an impact on me today. Like I love talking science and listening and learning more about particle accelerators. Like that's really cool. And your very touching story about Lady, and now sharing your story about long COVID. So, can I ask a quick question before we end?
Sure.
Why are you Alex the coffee addict? Do you want to give us a little background there?
I just drink a lot of coffee.
Me too.
It's I used to drink one big mug for every hour of school I had during college. So I don't know. I was drinking maybe a liter of coffee at that time. And I've scaled back since because it really wasn't healthy. But this is where I got my reputation from.
Yeah, like there's a sweet spot for coffee. I talked, like we had Timothy Cotfield. He's a health law professor, and he loves talking about coffee. You can obviously have way too much coffee, and some people are more affected by coffee. But there's a sweet spot where it's not bad for you. That's what the current research seems to show. So, and also I believe for me that's a bit of confirmation bias because I love coffee.
Yep, absolutely.
So they can follow you on social media.
Well, yeah, I'm more of a lurker on Twitter.
That's okay.
So I'm not sure if following me is going to enlighten you. But why not? I mean, I'm on Twitter and I'm on Facebook under my real name.
Alex Gabard.
Yes. Gabard.
Gotcha. Perfect. Okay, so we'll make sure we at least link you to. Let me start that again. We'll at least we'll make sure in the show notes there's a link to your Twitter so people can click on that.
Okay, excellent.
Alex, this has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much. People who are listening wouldn't know it that you are struggling with brain fog from long COVID, and thank you for talking to us.
Sure, you're welcome. My pleasure.
Okay, it's been a super long time, and I hope that you guys have been sort of biding your time for this to happen again. But it's time for the mailbag. Ooh, that's a name that we haven't heard in a while, so I'll explain it. The mailbag is when we ask you guys to submit your questions on Twitter, and then we answer them on the podcast. So if you're lucky enough to post a question on Twitter and then also get answered in the podcast, and then you also listen to the podcast and you're listening to this one right now, you're so lucky because you get to hear your question answered. We have our first question coming in from Kathy Zerker. And she says, good call, Adam. Her first question, it's a two-parter question, is how is Operation Bring Kitty Home going? So Operation Bring Kitty Home is Ginger is going to come to our house and most likely be in the basement most of the time because that's where the dogs won't terrorize her and Dad won't have his terrible allergic reactions. We are putting her on some non-allergy food, so hooray. But yeah, Operation Bring Kitty Home, new developments have been happening. We're going to take her home very soon on a day in which I'm not busy, so probably like tomorrow we'll have a meet and greet with the dogs. And we'll film it. We've been cleaning up the house, so then there isn't stuff on the floor, like shoes or something in the background. But yeah, soon enough you will see content of Ginger. And the second question is, who is this person Adam fixes lunch and buys flowers for? Just kidding. Never answer that question on the podcast. So I guess that one stays a secret. You guys get to keep on guessing. Dad, do you have a question that you want to answer?
Yeah. Okay. So I believe the one that I was going to answer was from Nana Net. The question is, did Bunsen go to puppy school like Beaker? And the answer is yes. We took Bunsen to puppy play, and he was a wallflower. For the first class, he was scared of all of the other little puppies. He was this great big roly-poly guy, and he just hung back by the corner, and he just looked at all the dogs playing. And then in the last 5 minutes, I believe it was a little golden retriever puppy, got him out of his shell, and he just started to play like there was no tomorrow, and it was the cutest thing. And then after that, he never looked back. So we took Bunsen to puppy obedience, and he rocked that. We took him to level 1, and he rocked that. We took him to level 2, nailed that too, and level 3 as well. Well, luckily for us, a lot of the really tough things that dogs find very challenging were very easy for Bunsen because he's a big dog, large breed dog. Like the sit and don't move and the lay down and don't move are things that he does anyways without needing treats because it's his favorite thing to do is lay down. So the big test was like lay down for 5 minutes and then you had to leave. And Bunsen did that great because he just went to sleep. So no big deal for him. That's really tough for Beaker. So hopefully that answers your question, Nanette.
While you were answering that question, something crazy happened with the dogs. Beaker has her little mat with like her toys and stuff on it, and she was like guarding her toys, and then Bunsen came over and just stood there, and she snipped at him because she didn't want him to grab her toys, and she got very angry at him because he wanted to get her toys. So yeah, that just happened. It's just like when they were fighting over the rock, but that's a story for a story time part of the podcast.
I can't believe they fought over that rock.
He fought over a rock. Okay, now that the scheduled off the rails conversation has happened in the family section of the podcast, Mom, do you have a question that you would like to answer?
Okay, Adam, on the layer was Annalise's hair tie.
Oh, yeah. Beaker stole it and put it there.
Yes.
She likes collecting her treasures.
So this is a treasure, and Bunsen was like, what is this? What is this hair tie? It's a scrunchie. And Beaker's like, actually, no, I don't want you to have that scrunchie. And Bunsen's like, can I please have that scrunchie? And then it was like, bark, bark. And that happened. But yes, I have a question that I'm going to answer in the mailbag. And this has numerous parts, but I might just answer a few. So this one comes to us from Miss Cranky JJ, and it says, do Bunsen and Beaker eat the same type of food? No, they do not. So Beaker is on hypoallergenic dog food because she appears to be allergic to life, and we'll see how she does in the spring. But in the winter, she seemed pretty good. Her paws weren't all or bothered, and her ears were pretty much under control. But now that the spring has sprung, we're noticing maybe some instances where she is a bit itchy. So we have her on this food to help mitigate the symptoms of that. And Bunsen eats raw food. And if he eats her kibble, he loves it. But if he has it too many days in a row, then he pukes. So we have issues, I guess, dietary issues with our dogs. And we just deal with it. And how many animals do we have? Well, we have the 2 dogs, and we're well on our way to have Operation Ginger work out well for us. And I have the 2 turtles, Carl and or Sagan, and those are all the animals that we have specifically that live in the house. And the next question is, do the dogs get jealous of each other sometimes? Case in point, tonight when there is a scrunchie and there's only 1 scrunchie per 2 dogs, that's a problem. And
but generally Bunsen doesn't care what Beaker has. Like, he'll just make a stand randomly some days. He'll put up with her garbage and then decide, you know what, today's the day. I am not letting anybody have the toy.
No. So the last question.
And he hides it. He goes away and hides it.
Yes. The last question is, do Bunsen and Beaker each have a favorite toy? Apparently, it's a scrunchie that belongs to Annalise, but no. Bunsen's favorite toy is the hedgehog, and he loves the hedgehog. And I'm very glad that we can get them at Global Pet Foods, and sometimes they have them at Winners, and they go, oh, oh. They have a really interesting squeak. Bunsen loves the hedgehog. Right now, his hedgehog is in the bathroom because Beaker doesn't go in there. But actually she does. But she doesn't really. But it's tucked away in the corner. I don't know why it's there, but it just is. And I think look at
Bunsen
it every
put
day.
It there. I think he hides it from her.
I think so. It's like, because he will not go into confined space. He's not a fan. And that includes the ensuite bathroom. He's like, oh, I'd really like to come in there with you, but the floor is lava. And Beaker will come in. Oh, hi, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, hi, Beaker. And she's like, okay, I'm done. But yeah, Beaker's favorite toy is any toy that you play with her with. She loves to shred them, but not all of them, only some of them. And then some of them last for a very long time. And then today's the day, Shredville. So I don't know. She just likes to play chase with her toys and the stuffies. So yeah, that's my answer to the mailbag. Thank you for asking, and thank you for everyone who submitted a question. We really appreciate it because we love talking about the dogs, and we love talking about what you want to know.
Well, that was the family section. That was mailbag. Time to close up the mailbag. Thank you guys so much for listening, and hope to see you guys on the next episode of the podcast. Bye-bye.
That's the end of another Science Podcast episode. Thanks so much for coming back week after week to listen to our show. Special thanks to our expert guest, Dr. Alex Gabard, who talked to us about particle acceleration, particle accelerators, smashing particles, relativity, and also the serious topic of long COVID. Thanks, Alex. We'd also like to give a special shout out to our top tier patrons on Patreon. Without their support, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. Take it away, Kris.
Chris Kelly, Samantha Dodd, Kimberly Bond, Nate Stephenson, Debbie Anderson, Courtney Proven, Renee Hardy, Mary Rater, Shelby Leggett, Mary Coos, Katya Lynch, Marianne McNally, Andrea Persons, Elizabeth Bourgeois, Karen Beth St. George, Bianca Hyde, Sandy Breimer, Tracy Halberg, Jenny Jaguar, Leela Perriello, Lynn Armstrong, Lisa Swartz, Catherine Jordan, Donna Craig, Lila Ashir, Jody Ogren, Liz Button, Kathy Zerker, and Ben Rathert.
For science, empathy, and cuteness.